ships across to the Hormuz Strait, and they happen to be contested by the United Arab Emirates since 1971. They, in a way, reflect almost a copy of the creation of Israel. You know, the British were about to withdraw from the region, and Iran jumped in 1971, occupied those islands. So they have a degree of legitimacy in terms of having an argument over them, where the Americans can buy in some support from the Gulf states, particularly the United Arab Emirates. And if they are now talking with other allies about the possibility of restoring the traffic in the Hormuz Strait, I think those islands are probably what they have in mind, that the Americans will try to occupy those islands and control the traffic.
Sultan, isn't the problem here is the American appetite to actually do that? We're only hearing about, what, 5,000 troops absolute max to be able to do that now?
Well, these are very small islands, and I think the American...
Clark Island is almost designed to be a military base. You park tankers next to it, so you can park a frigate next to it. It's quite large. What I'm suggesting is that, yes, this might be a good idea for the Americans, but the moment Americans are dying as a result of trying to occupy an island or the appetite disappears. This is what I'm asking you, is that the Americans have great ideas, but when they start losing soldiers, the war gets criticized at home, they kind of don't follow through. That's a danger, right?
Well, that's a danger if you think long term. But I think at the moment they've been pushed aside around by Israel, and they're following all these great ideas. And the hope is that by the time they occupy those islands, they would have reduced the ability of Iran to pose any threat to the islands themselves. You know, they will not have the missiles, the ability to fly, there are no planes left, and so on and so on. So they are, I think, in that mood where by the time we get those, the Iranians won't be able to defend, but we will be in a position where we can bargain with the Arab states and everybody else around those islands. Now, if it works, we don't know, but at least from an Israeli perspective, we know that they're not going to contribute any soldiers to this because they've already told the Americans we're pinned down in Lebanon, we're busy doing something else. It has to be American soldiers. And if the American soldiers, if this goes wrong and the American soldiers are killed, then I think you're right. I mean, there will be a real outrage in the United States that this is no longer just a special operation that we were promised was going to be sharp, short, and targeted. This is evolving into something much, much bigger.
Sultan, we'll talk more about this later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, you're watching Al Jazeera's continuous coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. Here's a reminder of the latest developments. There's been an attack on Iran's Natanz nuclear enrichment facility. There's been no leak of radioactive material from the site. Natanz was one of the main targets during last year's 12-day war, after which Donald Trump claimed Iran's nuclear capabilities had been obliterated. There's been mixed messaging from the White House. Donald Trump says he's not looking for a ceasefire, but he's also says he's considering winding down the war against Iran. The Pentagon's also asking for more money and sending more troops to the region. And the UK has condemned Iran's targeting of the Diego Garcia military base with ballistic missiles. It's a joint US military base in the Indian Ocean, and the UK's Ministry of Defence says the attack was unsuccessful. And Iran is still blocking the Strait of Hormuz, where around 20% of the world's daily oil supplies usually pass through. It's forced oil and natural gas prices to surge, contributing to what the International Energy Agency says is the largest supply disruption in history. The US is calling on NATO allies to help guarantee shipping through the crucial waterway. Juliet Ager explains why achieving that goal is difficult.
Securing the Strait of Hormuz is no easy task. Firstly, it's narrow, located between Oman and Iran. It's only about 39 kilometers at its widest point. Secondly, the waters are shallow, confining supertankers to two tight shipping lanes, one for going in and the other for going out. The limited space means that if they're attacked, these huge ships have very little room to maneuver. Iran controls the islands nearby. That includes Kesh, Abu Musa, the Greater and Lesser Tums, and Larak, which it can use as military outposts to launch drones and missiles. But Iran has another advantage. Its southern coastline is mountainous. This provides camouflage for fortified bunkers deep underground, but also for missile launchers. Iran has plenty of military options at its disposal. That includes fast attack craft, submarines, and mines. US forces have been targeting its naval assets, but Iran says it retains significant capabilities. So, what would it take to end its grip on the Strait of Hormuz? Well, naval vessels would need to escort commercial tankers, and that's to help provide protection against any attacks. The waterway would also have to be cleared of any mines, and perhaps most significantly, the entire operation would require international cooperation.
Now, Chris Doyle is a commentator on Middle East affairs. He's also the director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding, and he joins us from London. Zohreh Kharazami is an associate professor at the University of Tehran, and she's live from there. Thank you both for your time. I'm going to start with you, Chris, first. An alleged attack on Diego Garcia, a US-UK military base. A lot of confusion coming on what the British stance towards Iran actually is. No, we're not going to allow British bases to be used on Iran. No, actually, we are going to allow this. We are part of it. We're not part of it. There is a danger here that the British are being dragged into a conflict with Iran because of this indecision making. And that could come back on Britain, right?
Britain is getting sucked into it, but I don't necessarily think it's because of indecision. I think it is because Britain has these interests in the Gulf that made it always vulnerable if a conflict began. We have, for example, 240,000 British citizens lived in the Emirates prior to the conflict. We have bases in the region and so forth, as well as close allies. And it was very difficult at the beginning to say no to the United States. That comes at a cost, to say, no, you can't use the bases. And then an agreement was worked out that those bases could be used for defensive purposes. But when the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and it clearly has this enormous global impact, once again, impacting all the major global economies, all the economies of the world, in fact, Britain, again, is pushed towards it because, of course, there's a desire to see the Strait opened up because there's all talk about fuel shortages and how we might fuel ration in the future. So you can understand the concerns of Downing Street that something has to happen to open the Strait. Now, is this going to work? I think is another matter because I don't see how more bombing is going to necessarily resolve this situation. It's amazing. Every time you hear a Pentagon press briefing, or even President Trump, he always talks about tomorrow Iran is going to be hit even harder, as if you smash the nail that little bit harder with the sledgehammer, it's going to work. And the evidence
Chris, I'm
so
going to
far
stop you there because you've made a very interesting point that I want to bring to Zohreh Kharazami, who is with us in Tehran. It's always been a very difficult relationship between the between Iran and the UK, oftentimes referred to as the little Satan. But if Britain gets into this war, what can Iran really do? Can you strike Diego Garcia? What are the options there for Iran?
Actually, UK had already joined. There are the news in the American media we can follow that the American aircrafts are loaded with the bunker busters in the British bases. So I think that they are not, they don't dare actually to express it, and they are just stepping in and out. Not only the UK, but also other countries that you named, and they're just giving statements about Hormuz. That because they know that the United States, they're throwing them under the bus. Actually, Americans like to save the lives of Americans and push these actually countries, the so-called partners, to actually have their casualties on the front line. And the UK and also the other countries named are showing this reluctance to join the scene in rhetoric. However, many of them are behind the scene, are helping and actually engaged. Italians, France, and the NATO has Turkey 2 days ago actually mentioned that they're bolstering their defense, for example, systems in Turkey. So
Zahra,
Iran
but
is
as
doing
you know, Zahra, as you already
confrontation
know,
with the world.
as you already know, Zahra, but there's a lot of diplomacy and there's a lot of talking going on within the Gulf states to try and bring this to a head. But every time Iran strikes a Gulf nation, that becomes much more difficult. Chris, I'll come to you in a second, but I just wanted to put that to Zahra. It's going to be difficult for Tehran to re-establish these relations once this is over with the Gulf states, and that's dangerous.
When different cities of Iran are carpet bombed by the Israeli and the American aircrafts that are flying and refueling over Saudi Arabia from Dubai and Ras Al Khalifa, for example. They targeted Khark. Wall Street Journal indicated that Saudi Arabia is helping actually very much in refueling the bombers. The CENTCOM published pictures that indicated the HIMARS systems and the GCC is actually working against Iran. So there are lots of objective reasons that Iran cannot actually sit and witness to be bombed and at the same time be actually fooled with this maxim of diplomacy. We were in the middle of negotiations when the Israeli and Americans attacked Iran. You remember that the Omani foreign minister just 24 hours before the attack was talking about a lot of hope and a lot of collaborations from the Iranian side in the negotiations. And before even one day, it was the time the United States and Israelis attacked Iran. So weapons have only one response, that is weapon. An eye for an eye makes the world blind. I'm sorry, but it's the fact.
I want to go to Chris now. Crystal, you heard Zahra speak there. It's a very common sense of anger, coming from Iran. This is what the Gulf states are doing. They are helping America, so therefore we've got no choice. We have to, we have to attack back. And we're not attacking them. They are our brothers, but we're attacking American interests, British interests in the region. But at some point, the British are going to have to get involved here. The Americans are going to have to get involved here diplomatically, but no one trusts you guys now. Including, and this is the question I want to ask you, including in the Gulf states, because you were supposed to protect, the Americans and the British were supposed to protect, and all you've done really is made them more vulnerable.
Well, I think that, one must differentiate between Britain and the United States. And what I would first of all say is that I don't think the Gulf states look for this war. In fact, many of them are actively trying to negotiate a path away from war, to principally Oman, but not only Oman. And Iran has lobbed missiles, drones, even cruise missiles towards neighboring states. And we've seen over 2,000, for example, being intercepted over the Emirates alone. So I think that, plenty of civilian infrastructure has also been struck in all of that. So I think we have to hold Iran somewhat responsible for that. I do agree, however, that those negotiations that were taking place, brokered by Oman, were shamefully undermined and ripped up. And I think here, this is what Britain had wanted. Britain wanted those negotiations to go forward. In fact, our national security advisor was there in the final rounds, Jonathan Powell, and he's reportedly made it very clear that he believed that the negotiations were going forward and could have worked out. But, of course, yes, we are getting sucked in. But it is a reluctant Britain. This isn't the jingoistic, hawkish Britain, say, of Blair in 2003, that was itching to get to war with Iran. No, this is Prime Minister Starmer being very cautious. I don't think he wants to get any further involved. He'd much rather have negotiations, see the strait opened. He's very worried about the complete lack of strategy. And every time we hear from President Trump, we hear these divergent views, escalating, de-escalating, talking, not talking. What is going on? And that alarms America's traditional allies in the Gulf, in Europe, and elsewhere. So I think it is necessary to make that distinction between those parties. Yes, they're not in favor of the Iranian regime. Britain certainly is no friend, but it's also not happy with the way this war broke out and the way it is being conducted.
Interesting point, and I want to go back to Zohreh, who's live for us in Tehran. Zohreh, one of the big problems here, and let's be absolutely honest about this, when it comes to Iran, is that you don't have any trust left with the negotiation process. Like you say, you're in the middle of the negotiation process, and then US and Israel attacked Iran. Is there a fear developing within Tehran that any potential future negotiations is just Israel and the US buying some time before they attack you again? And therefore, what's the point in negotiations?
Absolutely. You see, from the Iranian perception, actually, is that the commandment of this war is in hands of Israel now. Trump is always giving contradictory and inconsistent comments. He is trapped in confusion, and pushing others and actually dragging their legs into this war is only to have more parties be actually engaged in this strategic defeat of the United States. And UK, Germany, France, Italy, South Korea, Japan, all of them are knowing and absorbing this message. So they are very much reluctant to express explicitly that they are militarily engaged. Iran cannot sit and see the GCC as the proxies of America and the U.S. regime in the region to be a platform of active aggression against it. So the leverage on the hormuz is a help not to make the global economy down. Actually, Iran is to stimulate these GCCs to be sovereign enough to stop the United States, to stop its active aggression from their territories against Iran.
Right.
It's a very simple fact. If anybody is worrying about the situation, should have this pressure on the United States regime and Israeli regime to stop it.
Now, that's Zohreh Karazami in Tehran. Chris Doyle, also, thank you so much for your thoughts. It's great having both of you on. The US has eased sanctions on some shipments of Iranian oil to help boost flagging global supplies. For the next 30 days, vessels that were loaded in Iran and are now stranded at sea will be able to deliver oil and other petroleum products. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that the measure will quickly bring 140 million barrels to global markets. John Hendren has more from Washington, D.C.
It only affects oil stranded on ships, and it's not clear that it'll affect the market at all. Iran sends most of its oil to China on a shadow fleet that evades sanctions. Much of the oil on these ships has already been bought and paid for. So it's not clear that there will be a huge effect there. But consider this. The U.S. is relieving sanctions on Iranian oil. It has just done so for Russia just a little more than a week ago. And what that tells us is how eager, how some say desperate Donald Trump is to try to ease those spiking oil prices that aren't just roiling the world and U.S. allies, but American citizens who are upset at him for starting a war, an unpopular war here in the U.S. that has driven up those prices. So the U.S. is trying every measure it can, even benefiting two countries that have been sanctioned for wartime activities and that could benefit from this. Trump has been complaining as much about Europe and U.S. allies as he has been bragging about U.S. progress in Iran. Early on in the day, he was posting angry posts saying that without the U.S., NATO was a paper tiger, calling members of NATO cowards. What's he upset about? He's upset that they're not protecting the Strait of Hormuz, where all that oil is coming out. That, of course, is what Iran is threatening. And he is repeatedly, on his way out of town in the evening on Friday, he went from reporter to reporter to reporter and gleefully answered questions about how upset he was about the European and the NATO response. And then later on, he issued a statement on social media in which he both talked about the possible end to the war coming soon, or hinted at it, saying we are getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our great military effort in the Middle East. And then he offered something of a threat, suggesting that the U.S. might not protect the Strait of Hormuz at all. Here's what he said at the end of that very long tweet. The Hormuz Strait will have to be guarded and policed as necessary by other nations who use it. The U.S. does not. If asked, we will help these countries in their Hormuz efforts, but it shouldn't be necessary once Iran's threat is eradicated. Importantly, it will be an easy military operation for them. So he's essentially saying, on the one hand, the war may end soon. On the other hand, he's saying, you've got to police the straits yourself. We're not going to do it. And while all this is happening, just to put it into context, the Pentagon is asking for $200 billion. That's a quarter of the cost of the 13-year Iraq war. So a lot of mixed signals coming out of the White House. But one thing we know, he's angry at NATO.
Now let's take a look at some other news. In Ukraine, a Russian drone attack has caused a major power cut. Officials say most residents in the northern region of Chernihiv are without power after an energy facility was hit. The local governor says repair work is underway. Before the war, around 1 million people lived in the area. Europe's been tightening its rules for asylum seekers by extending the list of safe third world countries where they can go to instead. It's also making it easier for people to be deported if they fail to qualify. Now, some countries are going as far as revoking asylum status. And as John Soropoulos reports from Athens, it's not always clear why.
Elpida has just started school. She's proud of her Greek reading, and so are her parents, who are Turkish refugees. 7 years ago, they were granted asylum in Greece because in Turkey they had been imprisoned for editorials they wrote, but their status in Greece is now at risk. In January, Elpida's father, Ali, received an email from the Migration Ministry.
Ένα μυστικό έγγραφα.
It said there was a secret document. Then it said I was a danger to national security and the process of revoking my asylum had begun. A month later, I got a letter saying my asylum was revoked at this date and time. It said you can go back to your country or find another country. But we have sent your file to the police and they can deport you.
The Greek Council for Refugees, which represents Ali, says Greece is revoking protection for a large number of Turkish refugees on obscure grounds.
You are not aware of what is the concern or the accusation in terms of national security that is extended to you by the Greek administration. You have no means to challenge it in any substantiated manner. So this creates a very significant concern in what regards access to effective remedies and to actual judicial protection.
Ali's is part of a broad sweep of revocations now underway in Greece. The Migration Minister has asked for a review of all asylum cases. As a temporary status, it can be revoked, something that spiked since Thanos Plevris assumed office in July 2025. Last year alone, Greece revoked the asylum status of almost 200 people, compared to 400 in the previous decade. Dozens more cases are under review this year, and there appears to be a religious element to the policy. Greece suspended asylum applications for mainly Muslim asylum seekers arriving from Libya for 3 months last summer. Most of the people whose asylum is being revoked are from majority Muslim countries. And at a recent parliamentary committee hearing, Plevris stated clearly that Greece doesn't prefer Muslim workers.
There are countries with which we don't have common values, and that's mainly because of religion. Let's be clear, it's because of hardcore Islam. So you have to pick countries that are religiously neutral.
European politicians are pushing back against the asylum policies of recent years that saw millions of refugees make their home here. In so doing, they are redefining what it means to be European. John Soropoulos, Al Jazeera, Athens.
Now, last year, the US suspended most of its foreign aid, impacting more than $12 billion in annual support for Africa. Instead of donor-driven aid, the US is now offering transactional health compacts. And some African governments and activists say these deals come with too many strings attached, from mining interests to control over patients' data. Harry Mutasa reports from Zimbabwe's capital, Harare.
It's visiting hour at Sally Mugabe Hospital, and people are going to see friends and relatives who are sick. Like many public health care facilities in Zimbabwe, there are shortages of TB drugs and essential medicines. The government has for decades struggled to fund its public health care sector. Rumbidzai Pondamari gets her antiretroviral drugs for free from humanitarian agencies. She worries global cuts to funding and aid could lead to shortages. When she heard her government had rejected a $367 million deal with the United States, she panicked.
Buying pills at the pharmacy costs $15 to $20. I can't afford that. If I stop taking these HIV drugs, I will die.
Government officials in Harare say they refused the so-called health compact because Washington demanded access to Zimbabweans' biological samples for research. Politicians say there is no guarantee Zimbabwe will have access to vaccines or treatments that might be developed from data collected from Africans and sent to the US.
Can't you see that we're going back to the slave trade days, where actually our able and strong men were supposed to go there and help the West in their economic development, because here maybe they were not needed according to them. Those types of racial undertones and slave trade type of attitudes is what we thought were being projected here.
These are some of the African countries in negotiations with the US for billions of dollars in new funding. In exchange, the US wants access to critical minerals and control over sensitive health data. Zimbabwe isn't the only nation with concerns, though. Kenya was the first to sign, but withdrew after a court raised concern about how citizens' personal information would be handled. Zambia halted talks because the deal was tied to sharing sensitive data and control of mining interests. The US says the funds will be released directly to African governments rather than to aid agencies, as was often the case in the past, over a 5-year period. They will support programs on HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and epidemic preparedness. It also says Americans must benefit from the exchange, but it's not clear how. Zimbabwe needs help to fund its HIV programs, but politicians say if that means handing over personal health data, then Washington can keep its money. Harry Mutasa, Al Jazeera, Harare.
Now, hundreds of people have been rescued from severe flooding on Hawaii's Oahu Island. Many homes have been destroyed, with flooding believed to be the worst in the state for 20 years. Mandatory evacuation orders have been issued. It's Mother's Day across most of the Arab world and the Middle East. It's usually a time of celebration, but in Palestine, it's a day of grief and hardship as mothers mourn children lost in the war, and children face the day without their mothers. Hind Khudri reports from Gaza.
In most places, Mother's Day is filled with flowers, gifts, and celebration. But here in Gaza, it is marked by tears and grief. Mothers who lost their children during the war, killed in Israeli attacks, mark this day in mourning instead of celebration. Like Imrami, she still lost 3 of her sons. 2 of their bodies are still being withheld by Israeli authorities. She never said goodbye, and still waits for the moment she can hold them one last time.
I miss my sons on Mother's Day. They used to bring me gifts, flowers, sweets, and ask me about my needs. They were the light of my life. I keep looking at their photos and clothes.
Inside her tent, their photos rest beneath her pillow. She looks at them every day, as if holding on will keep their memory alive. She has not given away their clothes. They are the only last pieces she has left of her sons. Other mothers spend this day in graveyards, sitting beside their children's graves in the only place they feel close to them. And for many children, there is no Mother's Day at all. Their mothers were killed, leaving behind silence where love once lived. Maram Ahmed is 14 years old, the sole survivor of her family. She lost her mother, her closest friend, in an Israeli airstrike that killed her entire family. This year, Maram will not celebrate. She will watch other children with their mothers in silence.
On Mother's Day, even if I didn't have money, I would buy my mum a gift from my allowance, even if it was for less than $1. I just wanted to make her happy. This year, my mum's not with me. This is the second Mother's Day without her. I feel so sad when I see other children with their mothers, but I don't show it.
This day carries unbearable loss for mothers who lost their children and for children who lost their mothers. On Mother's Day in Gaza, there's no celebrations, only loss. Mothers are grieving and children are left behind. Hind al-Khudari, Al Jazeera, Gaza, Palestine.
Now I want to bring you live pictures of a Nowruz celebration. That's the Iranian spring, arrival of spring and the new year taking place in Berlin. Now we're going to take a short break. Stay with us. The news continues at the top of the hour.
As the US-Israel war on Iran rages on, its impact has spread far beyond the battlefield. Energy prices are soaring as facilities and supply routes are targeted, and vital shipping lanes choked.
We strongly encourage other nations whose economies depend on the strait to come and help us.
Stay with Al Jazeera for extensive coverage and expert analysis as shockwaves continue to shake the global economy.
Hard-hitting interviews.
Aren't you afraid that you might be one of the targets?
Anyone could become a target. We have seen that they have no hesitation about targeting any place.
Facing realities.
Does Qatar still trust Iran enough to mediate?
Let's say that this aggression brings a benefit for no one.
Thought-provoking answers.
How many have been displaced inside Iran?
I've heard 3 million. It could be more.
Hear their story on Talk to Al Jazeera. Hearing the facts.
A busy day for Iran today could mean when Iran retaliates, it will be a busy day for cities in the Gulf.
With the latest global news and insightful documentaries, Al Jazeera's teams across the world bring you closer to the heart of the story.
Hello, it's 1400 GMT. I'm Imran Khan, and this is Al Jazeera, the continuing coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. Another wave of US-Israeli attacks across Iran. Tehran confirms a strike has targeted its Natanz nuclear facility.
We can have dialogue, but I don't want to do a ceasefire. You know, you don't do a ceasefire when you're literally obliterating the other side.
Donald Trump says he's not looking for a ceasefire, but considers winding down the offensive against Iran. And the UK condemns an Iranian missile attack on a joint British-American airbase in the Indian Ocean, thousands of kilometers away. Damage and injuries in central Israel as more residential buildings are hit by Iranian rockets. The US and Israel are striking more targets in Iran. This time, they're taking aim at a key nuclear site. Iranian state media is reporting a strike on the Natanz enrichment facility. There's been no leak of radioactive material from the site, and Israel says it wasn't involved in the attack. Natanz was one of the main targets in last year's 12-day war on Iran. During that conflict, the US dropped 2 bunker buster bombs on the facility, after which President Donald Trump claimed Iran's nuclear capabilities had been obliterated. That strike came just hours after US President Donald Trump gave mixed messages about the direction of the war from the White House. He said he's considering winding military operations down, but he's also rejected the idea of a ceasefire.
Oh, I think we've won. We've knocked out their Navy, their Air Force. We've knocked out their anti-aircraft. We've knocked out everything. We're roaming free. From a military standpoint, all they're doing is clogging up the strait. but from a military standpoint, they're finished.
Now, Israel says buildings have been damaged as Iran continues to target areas across the country. At least 6 impacts have been reported in Rishon LeZion, just south of Tel Aviv. And in southern Lebanon, Israeli troops are expanding their ground operation. Airstrikes are also targeted in a house in Al Mansouri in the district of Tyre. More than 1,000 people have been killed in Lebanon since hostilities resumed between Israel and Hezbollah on March the 2nd. Now we're live from Riyadh, Ramallah, Washington, D.C. and Tehran. But first, Ali Hashim, who's in the Iranian capital. Ali, this is a very serious attack, certainly for the Iranians on Natanz. What do we know and what are they telling us?
Sorry, Imran, if you can repeat the question, I didn't hear, the line was cutting.
Sorry, so the attack on Natanz, what do we know and how serious is it?
Well, there were several attacks in Iran over the past hours, from the north in Ramsar to Natanz, where the nuclear facility is. Now, there have been a kind of a statement that there are no radioactive material or any threat for now from that area, but now we're hearing of an attack in Ahvaz, close to a hospital, and the situation there is a bit sensitive. So several attacks, several areas around the country, and just this daily attacks are getting upgraded one after day, getting closer to more civilian facilities, and this is creating more concern.
That's Ali Hashim live for us there from Tehran. Now, as we reported, Donald Trump says he's considering winding down military operations in Iran. He made those remarks at the White House on Friday. Let's cross over now to Manuel Rapallo, who's in Washington, D.C. Either we're winding things up or we're requesting for more funding and we're deploying additional troops. How do we make sense of all of this?
It may seem counterintuitive, Imran, but there is a strategic message here from the White House. It seems counterintuitive, winding down the war, but at the same time sending more troops, requesting more funding. President Trump is signaling that the U.S. is close to achieving those military objectives in Iran, degrading the missile capabilities, undermining Iran's ability to hold any sort of influence beyond its borders. That's the message that the U.S. president is directing domestically here in the United States toward the American people, who are growing concerned over how long this war is going to last, how much this war is going to cost. At the same time, we're hearing from the Pentagon, which is Pete Hegseth explained this over the course of the last week, where he said that it is costly sustaining a military presence. So the deployment of thousands more troops, more naval assets to the region. Then there's the request for funding as well. Even if military operations do wind down, sustaining that military presence is going to cost a lot of money, which is why we're seeing this push from Trump administration officials, taking this to Congress and requesting something around the tune of $200 billion. Now, it's less a contradiction when you see it that way, but it is more of a balancing act, because the signaling, again, is that President Trump wants to wind this war down, but he wants to do it while still projecting strength in the region.
Now, Manuel, this has not been popular, though, with members of the MAGA base, Donald Trump's actual base itself. You know, senior MAGA leaders have come out and said, I've got problems with my constituents in Kansas City or wherever. You know, he was supposed to end wars. And also, it's not going to be popular with Democrats either, who are going to vote against any appropriations bill, especially one that is $200 billion. So what have they been saying?
When you look at the support for this war, which is one of the most wildly unpopular wars in recent history in the United States, there was more support for the war in Afghanistan. There was more support for the war in Iraq in the early days. Somewhere around a quarter of Americans are actually supporting any sort of U.S. involvement in Iran. It is split along party lines, with a majority of Democrats being opposed to any sort of U.S. involvement in Iran. But there is a rift starting to form within President Trump's MAGA base, people who feel disenfranchised, like the promise was broken, that President Trump would not be pursuing any adventurous wars in the Middle East. But there's also a growing concern over the potential for retaliatory attacks by Iran on domestic soil. Somewhere the polling suggests that upwards of 70% of Americans believe that the United States is in a more vulnerable position now than they were before the start of the war for the potential of a terror attack here in the United States. And these are all things that President Trump is keenly aware of as the November midterm elections approach. He knows that the longer this war drags out, the more spending has to go into sustaining this military presence, the more he's going to start losing support specifically within his own political base. And that's something that the president that's why we're hearing this sort of messaging from the president, where he's saying that he wants to wind things down, but also not lose that leverage that's needed, especially as alliances are frayed with European countries that are refusing to heed the call of the president, who says that NATO allies and other countries of the world need to do more militarily to help secure the Strait of Hormuz, for example.
Manny, stay there. We are going to come back to you in a moment. Let's cross over to our correspondent, Noor O'Day, who is in Ramallah. So you just heard about Donald Trump there. A little confusing there, but there seems to be something bubbling. But in Israel, it's all about pushing forward. Israel Katz is saying, we're just going to keep striking Iran.
That's right. I can't promise you any more clarity on this end of the news, Imran. The Israeli defense minister is talking more strikes, is talking more steps to undermine the foundations of the governing system in Iran. So the campaign, as far as Israel is concerned, is far from over. Take a listen to what Israel Katz had to say.
This week, the intensity of the strikes to be carried out by the IDF and the U.S. military against the Iranian terror regime and the infrastructure on which it relies will rise significantly. The campaign led by U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will continue. We are determined to keep leading the offensive against the Iranian terror regime, to behead its commanders and thwart its strategic capabilities until every security threat is eliminated.
Of course, as these statements are heard by ordinary Israelis who are trying to puzzle how the U.S. and Israel are working this out amongst each other, sirens continue to blare across Israel, Imran, especially in the north, where the communities on the confrontation line, as Israel calls it, are taking a battering. Israel has not been able to lift restrictions on public gatherings, has not been able to reopen schools, and this is building up public pressure on Israeli politicians who sounded very confident at the beginning of this war that things would be returning to normal soon. Now they're talking about more extensions, possibly into April, but at the very least until the beginning of the Passover holiday on the 1st of April.
That's Noor O'Day live for us there in Ramallah. Now, we are also learning that the US has eased sanctions on some shipments of Iranian oil to help boost flagging global supplies. Vessels that were loaded in Iran and are now stranded at sea will be able to deliver oil. That's in the hopes of stabilizing oil prices. Let's go back to Manuel Rapallo, who's in Washington, D.C. It would be very easy if I was a late-night comedian to suggest that this is Donald Trump putting Iran into the anti-Iranian coalition, but I mean, there does seem to be a reason for this. Can you walk us through that reason?
It really does appear that Trump is trying everything he can and looking for creative solutions out of what could very well be a massive global shock to international markets. The fact that there's still large portions of Iranian oil reaching global markets, that shows that Tehran's revenue is still not cut off, meaning that the U.S. is still, again, trying to actively pursue ways of mitigating this situation. Iran?
Yes. That's Manuel Rapallo there in Washington, D.C. Now to Noor O'Day in Ramallah and Manuel there in Washington. Thank you both. Now, Iran is also keeping up attacks on neighbouring Gulf states. On Saturday, a series of drone and missile strikes targeted Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, activating air defence systems. Let's get more from Rasul Sardar in Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh. Before we get into all of the diplomacy and everything that's happening right now, just talk us through the attacks that have been taking place across the GCC.
Indeed. So we know that the Kuwaiti air defense systems, according to the statement coming from the Kuwaiti officials, that have been engaged in intercepting the drones and missiles that were fired from Iran. And then we heard reports about the sounds of the blast in Bahrain. And then in United Arab Emirates, so the Emiratis security sources are saying that there has been at least 8 drones and 3 long-range ballistic missiles fired at the United Arab Emirates. And then in Saudi Arabia, right after the midnight, so the Minister of Defense here said that they have shot down 5 of Iranian drones that were aimed at the eastern part of the country. And then 5 hours ago, again, another statement was released by the Defense Ministry of the country here, saying 10 more Iranian drones have been intercepted again in the eastern part of the country. That eastern part of the country is quite significant because the overwhelming majority of Saudi energy resources and installations are there, including the processing plants and also the export terminals. So that's why these attacks are aiming at cutting the economic lifeline of the country. But while all of that is happening in the region, there has been quite an interesting statement coming out of United Arab Emirates. According to that joint statement from the Foreign Ministry of the Emiratis, so the leaders of the United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Japan, Canada, Republic of Korea, New Zealand, Denmark, Latvia, Slovenia, Estonia, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Czechia, Romania, Bahrain, Lithuania, and Australia about the Strait of Hormuz. So we're talking about now more than 10 of the countries here. And the interesting sentence there, Imran, is that they're saying, well, we express our readiness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure the safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, and we welcome the commitment of the nations who are engaging in preparatory planning. So what are these preparatory plannings? As of now, there are no details. Is this like a sign that there will be more diplomatic engagements or logistic contributions coming from these countries, or a military preparations that these countries also could be involved in securing the Strait of Hormuz? Yes, some major countries in the region, like such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other countries are not involved in this statement, but I think this is quite a remarkable joint statement, hinting a lot for the future.
Rasul, let's talk about public diplomacy. Public diplomacy is taking place from Donald Trump on Truth Social, is taking place on social media from other world leaders. The Iranian president had a message to the regional countries as well today that was posted on social media. So take us through what that said.
Indeed. So President Masoud Pezeshkian of Iran has today just posted on X and saying that the Islamic countries and our neighbors, you are our brothers, and we are not engaged in any dispute with you. So the only beneficiary of our differences is the Zionist entity, meaning Israel. And he's saying that he's asking God on the Eid al-Fitr to grant us strength and unity by acting upon the teaching of the Prophet Muhammad and to gain his consent. So here we're seeing that he's clearly making a distinction. So saying that we are targeting the Americans and the Israeli military assets or interests in the region. We have nothing to do with you. So we are allies. We are the neighbors here. And that has been a consistent message from Masoud Pezeshkian, president of Iran. And we have even heard that he coming up in front of the camera and apologizing for some of the mistakes that have been done. But later that answer was reversed. That statement was reversed. But the issue here is that despite the constant statements coming from the president of the country or the foreign minister of the country, Abbas Araghchi, saying that they are not targeting the regional countries, the missiles, the drones are constantly aiming the targets in the region, and not only American or Israeli interest here or their military infrastructure. Indeed, we've seen that the energy infrastructures are being targeted, the airports are being targeted, the residential areas are being targeted. And just recently, 2 days ago, when the foreign minister of several Islamic countries were holding a meeting here in Riyadh, there had been 3 ballistic missiles aimed at Riyadh. And then the country's foreign minister, Faisal bin Farhan, said, well, Iran is keeping talking about the Islamic solidarity, but it is attacking the Islamic countries here. And he said that what was left between Tehran and Riyadh, that the little trust that was left between the two is now almost shattered. And so indeed, we're seeing that more and more these attacks are continuing on these regional countries. The chances of diplomatic engagement between Iran and the regional countries is getting slimmer and slimmer.
Rasul Sardar, live for us there from Riyadh. A police officer has died as a drone crashed near the Baghdad International Fair in the Iraqi capital. Officials say the drone was targeting the headquarters of the Iraqi National Intelligence Service in the Mansour area in western Baghdad. It follows an attack on the US military complex near the international airport overnight. Asad Baig has more from Baghdad.
That would be the first attack against the Iraqi security apparatus here in the country. Before, we've seen attacks against US embassy, US base, US assets, but nothing targeting the Iraqi security services. Now that attack this morning, we saw the smoke rising. It's about 1 kilometer from the heavily fortified green zone where the US embassy compound is based. But we've also heard that drones have come down elsewhere in Baghdad. We're hearing a drone has injured 4 people, including a woman, after a drone came down on the highway in the Abu Ghraib district. And security services are also saying that those drones that are being launched are from the vicinity of Baghdad, raising serious security questions about how that is possible, being launched from inside the capital, targeting US bases, as well as apparently the Iraqi National Intelligence Service. Also in the north of the country, in the regional capital of the Kurdish region, Erbil, again a base was targeted where US forces are based. So this country again is being targeted by multiple sides. Iran is targeting Iranian Kurdish opposition groups. Armed Iraqi factions are targeting those groups, as well as US bases and assets, and the US is also targeting those armed factions. And this country is finding itself in the midst of this wider regional conflict.
Now, the UK has responded to Iran's targeting of the Diego Garcia military base with ballistic missiles. Now, it's a joint US military base in the Indian Ocean. The UK's Ministry of Defence says the attack was unsuccessful, and they called Iran attacks across the region reckless and a threat to British interests and British allies. The island is more than 5,000 kilometres from Tehran. Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mile is a retired British Army general, and he says the launch of missiles toward Diego Garcia is hugely significant.
There is a lot of information about what Iran had in its locker and may still have in its locker, and maybe 1 or 2 things that we didn't expect them to have in the locker. So is it hugely strategically significant? Difficult to tell. Would it have been tactically significant if it hit Diego Garcia? Yes. But it's part of a much, much wider conflict that's taking place at the moment. Diego Garcia is a large area, or the islands are, the Chagos Islands are. It's certainly always a threat. It requires you to take precautionary measures. My understanding is that one of the missiles may have malfunctioned. The second one may have been hit by one of what we call the shotguns that surround the American carrier fleet. But there's a lot of hardware in Diego Garcia. It's a prime target, but there will be mitigating actions that would have expected, at least, or anticipated that the Iranians would try something to strike that and disrupt operations there.
Now, Iran is still blocking the Strait of Hormuz, where around 20% of the world's daily oil supplies usually pass through. It's forced oil and natural gas prices to surge, contributing to what the International Energy Agency says is the largest supply disruption in history. The US is calling on NATO allies to help guarantee shipping through the crucial waterway. Jalid Aga explains why achieving that goal is going to be difficult.
Securing the Strait of Hormuz is no easy task. Firstly, it's narrow, located between Oman and Iran. It's only about 39 kilometers at its widest point. Secondly, the waters are shallow, confining supertankers to two tight shipping lanes, one for going in and the other for going out. The limited space means that if they're attacked, these huge ships have very little room to maneuver. Iran controls the islands nearby. That includes Keshm, Abu Musa, the Greater and Lesser Tums, and Larak, which it can use as military outposts to launch drones and missiles. But Iran has another advantage. Its southern coastline is mountainous. This provides camouflage for fortified bunkers deep underground, but also for missile launches. Iran has plenty of military options at its disposal. That includes fast attack craft, submarines, and mines. US forces have been targeting its naval assets, but Iran says it retains significant capabilities. So, what would it take to end its grip on the Strait of Hormuz? Well, naval vessels would need to escort commercial tankers, and that's to help provide protection against any attacks. The waterway would also have to be cleared of any mines, and perhaps most significantly, the entire operation would require international cooperation.
Now, Friday marked Nowruz, the Iranian New Year. It's also the beginning of spring in the Northern Hemisphere, but this year celebrations are muted for many, particularly those living outside of Iran. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians live in Germany. Dominic Kane spoke to some of them in the capital, Berlin.
It's a slightly subdued New Year at this Iranian bookshop in Berlin. Where Nowruz would usually be a time to celebrate, this year is different. Passers-by come to peruse the Persian literature and share a coffee with friends. Afzana and her daughter have come bookshopping. Although Afzana has lived in Germany for more than 20 years, the situation in Iran has affected her profoundly.
Honestly, I didn't feel like preparing the table this year with the 7 symbols, so to speak. But then at the last minute, I said no, it's so important.
She says the anti-government protests earlier this year and the war over the past 3 weeks have made it hard to stay in touch with her family in Iran. The government in Tehran has imposed a near total internet blackout.
I haven't had any contact for 10 or 12 days now, and even when they call directly from there, it's only for 20 or 30 seconds, then the connection is lost. They keep sending short updates or messages saying, please don't give up, be our voice, we're fighting.
It's thought close to 300,000 Iranians are living in Germany. Many who call Berlin home come to the Brandenburg Gate to welcome the new year, with mixed feelings.
We're not just here to celebrate our new year, but to demonstrate too and to say the people in Iran are not alone. We're here too.
The situation is scary, of course. Bombs are dropping and of course the people are scared, but the biggest fear they have is the Islamic regime surviving.
Nowruz coincides with the spring equinox in this part of the world. That's the moment in the year when the days start to have more light than dark. For many Iranians here, that has a special meaning this year as they remember their families in Iran. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, Berlin.
Now let's take a look at some other news. Europe's been tightening its rules for asylum seekers by expanding the list of safe third countries where they can go to instead. It's also making it easier for people to be deported if they fail to qualify. Now, some countries are going as far as revoking asylum status. And as John Soropoulos reports from Athens, it's not always clear why.
Elpida has just started school. She's proud of her Greek reading, and so are her parents, who are Turkish refugees. 7 years ago, they were granted asylum in Greece, because in Turkey they had been imprisoned for editorials they wrote, but their status in Greece is now at risk. In January, Elpida's father, Ali, received an email from the Migration Ministry.
ένα μυστικό έγγραφα.
It said there was a secret document. Then it said I was a danger to national security and the process of revoking my asylum had begun. A month later, I got a letter saying my asylum was revoked at this date and time. It said you can go back to your country or find another country. But we have sent your file to the police and they can deport you.
The Greek Council for Refugees, which represents Ali, says Greece is revoking protection for a large number of Turkish refugees on obscure grounds.
You are not aware of what is the concern or the accusation in terms of national security that is extended to you by the Greek administration. You have no means to challenge it in any substantiated manner. So this creates a very significant concern in what regards access to effective remedies and to actual judicial protection.